Welcome back to How to Be a Better DM. This is the show that helps you create better stories for yourself and your players as you DM Dungeons and Dragons. Today I'm joined by Tanner Wayland and Rob Van Helm. Actually, is that your last name?
That's my pen name. Van Auken.
That's your pen name, that's right.
Name.
What is your last name?
Van Auken. Van Auken.
Van Auken, that's right. I always mix those up.
No worries.
I mean, they're both.
One is very Dutch.
Exactly. And I'm Justin Lewis, and today we're doing kind of we decided to release this as, bonus episodes where we've been working on a homebrew project titled For Whom the Bell Tolls, the Chimefall Ceremony. And we're just showing you our process, showing you how we work through doing a home project, and this should help you in two ways. It should show you how to do a homebrew project yourself, as well as how to collaborate with others in doing a project like this. So let's get started at the top. Tanner, before you hopped on, me and Rob, I suggested that today we talk about things we have written thus far and kind of explain each of our own parts that we've done outside of these episodes. And then after that, we move on to talking about phase 1 of the one-shot and seeing if that's where we want it to be, if we need to add things to that. And then if it is, we move on to phase 2 and talk about how we want to divvy that up, how we want to structure that. And if phase 1's not up to snuff, then we start working on that again. Do you guys have any suggestions on that structure?
Works for me.
Awesome.
Yeah, sure.
So either one of you guys want to go first, or do you want me to go first about what we've kind of written and what we did in between these episodes?
If you'll permit me, and
of
again,
course.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you guys so much for having me on. This is awesome. I love this. I love working with you guys, and this has been a lot of fun for me. If you'll permit me, a word here about about project management and the discovery process through writing. So, you fellows, for you listeners, you may have heard this before, but our esteemed hosts here are producing out in the Midwest, and I'm over on the East Coast. So that in and of itself presents a little bit of a challenge. So whenever you're doing this kind of project, it's always nice to have some kind of web-based platform. We just happen to be using Google Docs. It's really easy for us. And built into those Google Docs, we have a lot of project management tools that are on the Google Doc to kind of keep us on pace and stuff. But we didn't discover that until a couple of weeks in, and we really kind of helped us out once we had some kind of an organization to kind of put our ideas and our thoughts into and let each other know what was happening and when. And the other thing is, and this is probably the hardest thing to do, is write. We all have busy schedules. We all have jobs. We all have our passions, our passion projects, and as I'm writing, more ideas are coming to the front for me, and more ideas are percolating. So even though I had an idea of what I wanted for my trial in this particular project, as I'm writing it, I'm realizing there are some issues with, and just to kind of lay it out for you guys, I was writing my trial, the Ballad of Broken Ice, and I realized that my trial was very single character centric, right? So I had this one character kind of making his way out onto the sheet of broken ice to achieve the bell that he has to win in order to kind of claim victory in this trial. And I realized that in the process of doing that, I just sidelined 3 or 4 of the other player characters. And so I was kind of forced to revisit that, and I'm rewriting that again now as a sort of skill challenge that each of the characters can make their way out onto the ice and either aid, assist, help, or even pursue their own ambitions by going for the bell that they have to win. But that's where I'm at. I just wanted to kind of put that out there for any of your listeners that are kind of curious about this process and maybe looking to collaborate with other listeners and what have you.
I love it. I mean, by this time, you'd probably have listened to the other episodes that we've released on this project, so you're probably aware that this is completely different than what we first started out as. It was, not completely different, but a lot of things have changed. Honestly, I don't really remember much about the first iteration, so.
Yeah, that was a long time ago at this point.
Yeah.
We'll have to look at the version history.
I know. Yeah, but, another issue I had with the trials, because I was thinking about it this past week. like you were saying, it is very person centric, and it almost feels like it would be better, if there were like maybe 2 or 3 small trials, like, and the point is that they can be done within like 20 minutes apiece at least, or something. That it's like, hey, there might be one header, like person, like one person who's kind of representing the group, but then the others can support, in various ways. Because I was thinking, I was like, you know what, like Rob was saying, when I saw your email, I was like, yeah, it doesn't work for us to have them so separate, because we don't have 3 DMs running 3 separate little, 3 separate little trials at the same time, so we can be efficient with our time. I don't know. Is that kind of the way we're going, or something similar to that now?
Well, I actually love so much of what you just put out there. So I think if each of us can keep in our mind's eye that I think all of these trials, save maybe the sort of climactic scene here, should try and be engineered for 20, maybe 30 minutes, right? If you're going to play a 4-hour session, you have like your sort of exposition in the first 20 minutes to half an hour, and then the next, the meat and potatoes, the body, so to speak, of the adventure here is, these trials. If each one of them takes 20 minutes, you've just spent an hour and 20 minutes doing the trials. If you take a half an hour, you just spent 2 hours doing the trial. So we're up to 2.5 hours now of game time. That last hour and a half really should be, the big bad, and the resolution. Let the characters have some kind of catharsis after, what happens. I love one shots. I always find the combat in one shots tedious because you have to finish it. And if you're going to get through the one shot, it's not like on a bigger campaign we could be like, oh gosh, we're in the middle of this, we're all down and out. Let's all take our healing potions and we'll pick up here next week. No, you got to get through the combat in order for it to work. And I like this idea of, it kind of gave me some food for thought, right? Maybe we somehow alert the PCs of the 4 trials or however many trials they're going to take and make them choose a lead. But then we have to find a way for the other characters to get involved as supporting cast during the trials. Right? Some of our trials lend themselves to that better in certain ways.
So, go ahead, Tanner.
Go ahead, Justin. No, Justin, please.
One thought I had about the timing is we maybe make an optional countdown clock, unknown to the players, but the DM knows. The DM has the choice of your players do 2 to 3 challenges max, and by the 3rd challenge, things are starting to go wrong in the city because of the bad actors. So it kind of changes focus from doing the challenges to stopping the bad actors to fighting the BBEG to resolution.
I love that for this reason. I think that some one shots do really well because they have like a kind of core mechanic, I guess you could say. Even though all of them use D&D, and the title "For Whom the Bell Tolls" really kind of like the bells toll at specific times, and the one thing we don't really have here is an element of time, right? And so it'd be like, oh, we have like various trials, and the players can theoretically get through as many as they want, but each one that they complete successfully, they get some kind of benefit, right? So it's kind of like, hey, the faster you get these done, the more benefits you get, and then you, in your own kind of as the DM, you have a timer going on, and maybe along these certain times, like a bell chimes, and then at 12 o'clock noon or who knows what, right? Then like big bell, and then that's when all the crap starts happening. Something like that. I don't know.
You just gave me a wonderful idea. I had been struggling with how to invoke the bad actors, right? I was going to have, or we were going to have, I should say, we were going to have these bad actors kind of like chiming bells or instituting this countdown And I'm wondering if maybe just by the virtue of not having guardians for the bells that are on trial, the countdown has already begun. And it starts when the PCs get there, and it's like, uh-oh. And so, like, we don't need to create a bad actor to do a thing and write all that back plot. That would be fun, mind you, and we may do a version of that, or we may dunk our toe in that and say, oh, we do like that, let's keep doing that. But another possibility would just be to like have the countdown already in place, and like it's the 11th hour, these are the final trials. If we don't have people who step up to become guardians, then whatever magic the bells are putting a barrier over opens up, and that might work, I think, because I like my bad actors, but this seems easier. Doesn't mean that we can't have antagonists.
Yeah, we can have antagonists, and honestly, it could be some antagonists who are like, hey, we're trying to keep you from getting to the big bell and becoming like guardians or whatever else, right? Yeah, because I pictured the last, because when you said the thing earlier about like, oh, one-shot combats can be tedious because you're just trying to get it over with, and it's usually like the last thing, before everyone can be done for the day and go home. I think that it might be nice to have the final battle be like a mix of battle and a mix of trying to get to something non-battle related. So, for example, it could be them trying to rush through these enemies, the quiet ones that are starting to appear, and the bad actors trying to get to a bell or some kind of equivalent, right? Or they're each trying to go their different ways or something. Not sure.
That's an interesting idea, because then what you could do, we don't have to, at that point, we don't have to make the big bad monster. We just have to have it appear, have the avatar of the other bell wardens who are currently bell wardens, the avatar show up, and they're fighting like over the city, giant style, like Mechagodzilla versus Godzilla. But you're like the little people on the ground trying to get to that final bell that can seal the gate or something and stop it from like exiting, and it kind of it would make for a very cinematic moment of like you're rushing, and every other turn you describe what's going on above your head with these giant figures just bashing over, and we don't have to make stat blocks, we just describe.
Right. Yeah, I think it would be and again, I'm very big right now on skill challenges. I think it would be really cool to kind of have that final encounter a mix of traditional combat and skill challenge, right? And what you're talking about, Justin, would be skill challenge related, because you need X amount of successful checks to get to this location and ring the bell or do the task. And for failed checks, another building comes down from this kind of monster that's up above. Because I like the idea of the monster being so gigantic or so intense that the players kind of intuitively know we can't attack that. We're level 5s. That's a Tarsk, a Trask, whatever, or whatever Trask level kind of thing. We have to use our brains in other ways to kind of defeat this. Let the Paragon fight this thing. I think that's kind of a cool idea. I love that, actually.
On that note, we could make it so it's kind of a chase scene or skill check to get to the bell. There's one mallet to ring the bell, and the bell has to be rung a certain number of times. And so in combat, like only one character can use their action to ring the bell per turn, and the rest of the characters, their job is to protect that person from like all of the monsters trying to get to that person ringing the bell. That way combat is 100% limited to like how many times they can ring the bell. Once they ring it enough, the thing stops. That might solve the problem of combat being so tedious, because instead of trying to kill the monsters, you're essentially trying to like wait out the clock, which goes back to kind of that time concept Tanner brought up.
Every ringing of the bell makes the portal kind of close.
Exactly.
And for every round you're unable to, it dilates bigger, So there's kind of like this tug and pull, like you can risk it for a round. You just have to do it twice the next time around.
Yes. And the monsters... Go ahead, Tanner.
No, yeah. I think that there's a lot of variations of this that works very well. At this point, it's just us being like, okay, we know that the goal is ringing a bell or multiple bells. How can we make this the most interesting for all three players? I think that the other two players have a really interesting time, specifically like if monsters are kind of appearing in greater and greater quantities, and it's kind of like zombie rush kind of thing where they're just trying to defend in that kind of way and buy time. For the person with the mallet, I think that we could give some simple rules like, hey, if they choose to fight a monster, the mallet is extra effective, but then they lose a turn to ring a bell, right?
Exactly.
And maybe another thing is like, oh, it's not just one bell. It's like maybe there's 3 guardian bells in general, right? Like when people go in, it's like, oh, we're getting space for 3 guardians. And it's like 3 guardian bells around like the central bell or something. And they have to like run through these enemies to the different bells or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Or something.
And then,
Go ahead.
well, I was just going to say, we would also make sure that in the mix of monsters fighting, there are monsters that have, like, not too many, but like either a stun capability or like a hold person capability. So there's stakes involved for the person swinging. So you're like, oh, I can't swing because like I'm stunned, and then someone else like grabs it from you and they take it up, this turn and stuff like that.
So in my mind's eye, these bells were being rung by like it's almost like, have you ever seen like it's like a big log that's being suspended by like 4, right? So
yes,
not exactly a hammer or a mallet per se, but if you want to change it to a mallet, that I could see where you're going with that. I like this idea of multiple bells in different locations because there's this kind of cool idea of like the bell will reverberate for oh so long, and if you don't make it if you don't ring them all in time, it shuts back down and you got to run back out to do it again. Now that could be tedious if we get the mechanic wrong, but I like that idea. I also like the idea that, if you're doing this as a skill challenge, right, it shouldn't be too hard for a character to ring the bell, but if they fail the challenge, they could still be successful at ringing the bell, but maybe 2 more monsters appear out of the portal for every failed check, right? So there is something at stake here, right? So like there's this kind of concept of like mop-up duty if we don't do this, in enough time. And for the purpose of, again, getting through combat, maybe we use like a swarm mechanic so that they don't have to sit there battling all these monsters with like 48 HP. They all have like 1 HP and they disappear with 1 hit kind of thing. And then lastly, and I know I'm talking a lot here, I got so many ideas, you guys are so good today. And not to mooch off of the film, but there's that John Krasinski, Emily Blunt film, the Quiet Place.
Yep.
Quiet Place.
Yeah.
I love this idea of like these creatures are drawn to noise, right? So if you're running and you're heaving and your armor's clanking, like they're piling after you. If you're shouting, "Get to the bell!" You drew 2 more characters. This way, one character can like be heroic and sacrifice himself and just start running around, clanging his swords together, drawing all of
bard.
the minions. But there's options there for that, and we're definitely gonna have to come up with some cool layer actions. I think when we look at like the battle map of the city here, we have to have some cool layer actions of things that slow them down, perhaps. Yeah, digging it.
Yeah. I really like the Quiet Place reference, specifically because it adds, like, let's say we did have 3 bells that they're trying to ring, in sequence. Like, if that's the case, it'd be perfect if we, like, kind of had that Quiet Place thing where each bell that gets rung, they're getting closer to their thing, but more enemies are coming.
Absolutely.
And so that means the 3rd bell or the final bell or whatever that is, it's going to be the hardest because there's the most enemies who came from other parts of the temple or whatever else, right? Which is a great progression. It's like, oh, the first bell, yeah, it's a little rough, but you can get there fairly easy. Second bell, okay, it's getting tougher. Third bell, how are we going to get through all those enemies,
I love it. I want to play this myself. I know it's going to happen. I still want to play it.
Just looking at kind of how we set up the different phases of the one shot. Obviously, we need to rewrite phase 2 and phase 3 a little bit. So we decided that the clock is already ticking, right? From the time the players start the one shot, the clock is essentially ticking. We could even put in like a DM tip, like set a timer for 1 hour, and as soon as it hits 1 hour, things start going bad, or I don't know. We'll figure that out. How do we let the players know? Like, let's say they're in the middle of one of our trials, and then the bell rings, and like the earth starts shaking and monsters start appearing or something. How do we let them know kind of what's going on? Like, how do we get them to the understanding that this portal's opening up? You have to go ring these bells. You know what I mean?
How do we put that idea out there, you're asking?
Yeah, yeah. So like I think it'll be obvious that like once the bell rings or something like that and they start seeing monsters appear throughout the city, they're probably going to be like, yeah, something bad is going on. But like, what do we do about it?
Here's possibility. I'm just thinking of like dragons in D&D lore. They have this kind of like regional effect, right? Like the surrounding area is affected by the pall of whatever kind of dragon. If it's a green dragon, there's like toxic plumes and things like that kind of start to perhaps the singularity that is the portal has already opened up over the city of Chimefall, and so that kind of like heralds bad things are about to happen, and because of that, warriors and monks have traveled to the city to test their hand at becoming a bell warden, and so like the danger is already there. It's already obvious, right? Like we don't even have to go into too much exposition other than maybe some lore at an info dump at the beginning. What is sort of unexpected is that while they're at the trial, it starts to swell or pulse, and like you can see it getting bigger. So the regional effect of that singularity is well known and well documented, and just in their travels they've already started to see things that once made noise are now becoming quiet. No birds, no crickets. The silence starts to kind of feel heavy, and then as they kind of approach the city they can see it, and this is already a somber occasion to begin with. Maybe that's how we draw them in, right? Like there's this regional effect happening that something is wrong, and as you get closer to the city you can see this thing, and when you ask about it, one of the monks kind of gives you that info dump of that, this appeared a month ago, and it's an evil is coming and approaching, and unless we do something about this, if the ceremony is unsuccessful, all is lost.
Yeah.
Possibility.
I like that, because I think it really does come down to there's some things that we're going to keep, that we just, from the start, we've got to tell them. Exposition, just get it out there so the players know. There's other things that we can wait and kind of can be a surprise or something that they intuit or learn while they're in the temple. And I think that's the real question we're asking here is what's worth telling them up front and what would be more exciting for them to learn later, right? Like, because if we went with a very simple, this is the town's ceremony. They replace the guardians every, whenever the guardians die. Whenever one guardian dies, they get a new guardian through some trials. It's just weird this year because all 3 guardians died randomly, so there's no guardians at all. And then they learn that this isn't just a ceremonial position being a guardian. This actually does something, or we do something else that's more like, they know that there's dire consequences, I don't know.
No, I wholly I like that. I like if I remember correctly, one of our discovery moments was going to be in that this is unusual that so many bell wardens have fallen, and that we suspect some kind of a foul play, which is how we were going to bring in our bad actors, which I still think we might want to do, or at least some kind of antagonist other than just the mindless kind of monsters that we were thinking about for the finale. The trouble here is in my mind's eye, I've got this massive campaign, and it's like how do we boil this down to a one shot? And for you listeners out there and aspiring writers, anything is better than nothing, right? So keep it simple. Like your math teacher used to say, keep it simple, stupid. Right? You might have that grand adventure in your head. You can always write it, right? But the goal for us is to produce our one shot. We could always add additional supplements or content for this later on. So I'm going to do my best to like block out the lore and all these cool things that are percolating for the sake of what you're talking about, Tanner, and just what is the exposition. And I think the right way to go would be a bit of an info dump with some peppering of discoveries throughout that kind of allude to the fact that this place is a bigger world. This is a bigger thing at play here.
Yeah.
So one way we might be able to do that is kind of the Hogwarts method, or the Dumbledore method, I guess you could say. You know, at the beginning of every year of Harry Potter's, life at Hogwarts, Dumbledore gets up and gives a speech about everything, saying, don't go in the Forbidden Forest, and that tells the readers that you're going to spend a lot of time in the Forbidden Forest. We could essentially have kind of the leader of the monastery hosting the trials, get up and like say, welcome to the Chimefall Ceremony. We're glad you're joining us for this somber and celebratory occasion. And then kind of a small recount of the history, like ever since the beginning, these 3 bells have protected us. And now, or these 12 bells have protected us, and now these 3 are vacant. And when these were rung, it closed the portal, and kind of that simple little tip,
right.
So that way at the end people are like, oh, maybe we just go ring the bells.
I imagine that would probably be the first. Not even at the end, they probably think that right away. But the catch is, you can't just go ring a bell. You have to be the bell warden. So first, you have to earn the. It's almost like they're sentient, right? Like the bell has to choose you. The wand chooses you, Harry. The bell has to choose you, and I think that that's a cool idea. The only thing we have to factor is, what if they fail the trials, right? Like, what is the runner-up? Like, do we have an NPC then succeed who can then kind of be recruited by the PCs? Right? There needs to be a secondary way to achieve the goal should they fail their trials. Otherwise, the trials are all just kind of meaningless because no matter what you do, you're going to win.
Yeah.
Right? Or maybe that is, again, if we run them like a skill challenge, that's an interesting idea. The players don't need to know this. This is like, behind the screen kind of DM stuff. That they will all succeed, but depending on how well they roll, depends on the boon that they get from the bell. Right? Like we can have like you failed, 5 out of 6 times. You still get the bell to make the plot move forward, but you really don't get any benefit from the bell at all, except maybe, in the case of the Ballad of Broken Ice, you now can cast the Ray of Frost cantrip, versus like, a level 6, ice spell of some kind, or something like that, right? Food for thought, because I love our idea, and then I could see, a player just they never heard of the hat trick of ones. I rolled 3 ones in a row. What do we do now?
I know, right?
So I think the question there is, do we want... So we're settled on the idea that the final challenge, like the final climax, is players doing skill check to get to bells and ring bells in the face of terrors and monsters. Yeah. I think the question then is, do they need to be authorized, is the word, to ring the bells for them to work?
Are we?
Go
ahead, Tim.
Go ahead. Go ahead. I don't have. I'm still thinking this through.
Are the trial bells different than the ceremony bells in your mind?
At least for the trial that I wrote, it does have a different bell. Like the trial itself has a different bell, but that can easily that's just one aspect, like the final aspect of the trial. So I can change that based on what you guys think.
I like, in my mind's eye, the trial bells were these conduits, these sort of stand-ins for the larger Chimefall bell, right? So like, if we're picturing 12 large bells around the city, and the 3 bells that are deactivated because they're guardians have fallen. When you successfully complete a trial and you capture the bell, it attunes to you. You see this kind of cool moment like above the city where it begins to glow again, like it's now activated. You could see, and everybody cheers. The town celebrates because they know one of the bells is now back on, right? And so you can carry the kind of like trial bell with you as sort of like the token that you are now the new bell warden for this. You get whatever magical boon it grants you, and everyone can see it. Now, again, like I said, we can make the PCs can lose, right? If we have 20 monks all attempt to do a trial and the PC fails, another monk wins, and that's how we get around the failure aspect. Is that there's now an NPC that's important to this success of this mission. And I think that might be cool for the DM because, hey, we get to play, we get to be an NPC. That could be like a really cool idea. So maybe the solution to that problem is just to come up with a half a dozen NPCs that we could sort of drop in to supplement as winners should the PCs really just have a bad run of rolls and fail the trial.
Excuse me.
And let's make them weird.
One thought that I had, so we could have like the trial bells be different, and then all the 12 bells are normally in this one central location, but when they're active and they're connected to a bell warden, I think it would be kind of cool if they were like hovering over the city, like circulating the point where that portal starts showing up. So like you can obviously look up and see the portal is within the bounds of these bells. When a bell warden dies, the bell lowers like magically into the room, and it's like one of the only bells there, But then again, that would mean that whoever rings the bell has to be a bell warden or so forth. So I don't know if I like that idea actually, because I think it would make it simpler if anyone could ring the bells if they got there,
It certainly would. Tanner, you were going to say something? I'm sorry.
I feel like there's some streamlining that needs to happen, or some, culling of the ideas so that we can just keep this as minimalistic as possible in terms of like streamlined and making so they can easily get it done in one session. I was thinking, in regards to the 12 bells, I kind of thought we should probably stick to like however many bells there are players or something, and basically make it so that the last challenge is less about, a one person ringing, all these different bells or whatever, but rather, each bell getting a new guardian, and they need someone, each of the players, to ring it or whatever, right? That way it's like, hey, we can avoid a lot of the, I guess, the lore that could confuse them. It's like, oh, because if we have 12 bells and like, then that like brings up the question, oh, do we have other bell wardens who are there, but it's just not enough? And, I feel like it just gets a little messy. There's a way to do it, certainly. But I think it's simpler if it's like, hey, there's as many bells as there are players. Here are the names of the bells, depending on how many players you have, right? But beyond that, I feel like, because we're talking about, oh, does the trial like get you a little bell or something? I think that's a fun idea, just because jingle bells, and it's like, oh, the bell warden like has a little bell on them, like a little bell pin, and you can hear them coming, basically, right? I think that's a fun idea. Another idea is just the trials, and kind of like, since we were talking about the time aspect, and like, hey, it behooves the players to try and get through here faster. The whole idea is that these trials are kind of like, you can't even get into the inner sanctum of the temple until you pass these areas of trial, right? So it's like, hey, it's not even about choosing a guardian. Once you get there, each person can like choose to be to ring a bell, and then they become the guardian. But the trials, you can totally say no to this, but I just thought it would standardize it and make it so that so that the time limit, the time clock makes sense, because it's like, hey, the sooner you get into the inner sanctum, then the sooner you can get there, and there's fewer chances of the quiet ones disrupting you in your trials, right? Because as the bell's going along, that rift is tearing, and there's more and more of these quiet ones like attacking you while you're just trying to do your trial to get through to the inner sanctum, right? Those were just a lot of different ideas. Sorry.
In my mind's eye, the trials were before any kind of significant rift had opened up, letting the creatures in. The MacGuffin was that we had this. I think we were going to do like these bad actor monks that were going to kind of compete for each of the bells. And up until today, I wasn't sure if we were going to do. They really had an evil agenda, or they just want the bells like anybody else does, right? Like they want a seat at the table, and they could just be really devout and want a seat at the table. Because I kind of had this cool idea that when the big bads do enter, they finally team up. It's kind of like that cool moment where the villain becomes the good guy. Your Vegeta's, your Darth Vader's, your fill in the blank here. And so like, yeah, here's this guy that really gave you a hard time in your trial. Like he beat the hell out of you, and he was all of a sudden, you lock eyes and you now are teaming up to fight, whatever. And I liked. You know what we think would behoove us? We need a map. We need a map of like the monastery city. It has to be kind of expansive. Like I'm thinking like not like too big. Like Baldur's Gate would be too big of a city, and Waterdeep would be too big of a city. But kind of like an in-betweener to kind of just get a sense of the spacing too, right? Because my trial abuts a lake. So there's a lake somewhere on the property, right? Yeah. And it's got to be like a Lake Michigan kind of sized lake, because a small lake's not going to cut it. How long does it take to get from the lake to the central monastery? And again, in my mind's eye, I imagined all of the bells in this sort of maybe a pattern, but in these large bell towers. So there was no one room that they would go to kind of ring all of the bells. And Justin, you brought up a good point, where it does simplify it if anyone can ring the bell, but it also kind of, if anyone can ring the bell, then we don't need to have these trials for the bells. But there should be some way to ring the bell, again, I guess if you fail, then the portal remains open, and they have to go to combat, right? Like they have to deal with the ramifications of the monsters. And then maybe, as a sort of like ex machina, the Paragon closes the portal, right? Then it becomes a skill challenge to kind of just entertain. That's how that would work, right? You have to do cleanup while the two big, Mechagodzilla figures are fighting it out, and you have to enable yours to win in order to close the portal. Should you fail to do the bells, right? Like that's a nice circle back. Right, we got a lot of safety nets here. Yeah. This works very well if I just got to get it on paper. All right.
So what I think maybe is like, and here's what I'm envisioning. There is what the players are doing, and then what's happening around them that we describe that doesn't actually have any mechanics. So I think it would be really nice if, and the whole reason like for this is, for this one shot, I think we wrote that it's designed for new DMs so they can run it. So I want to keep it simple, like avoid putting in NPCs that they have to play. Just basically they take care of the players and they describe anything that's going on outside, which is basically just paint on a wall, but it looks cool and it immerses them. So I imagine that like as the players are moving towards these bells, they see other monks and other warriors trying to do the same, but getting like waylaid with various monsters here and there. And, you know, as happens in D&D, there's just enough bells for these people, and you get there in just the right amount of time because, well, you're the hero of the story, so you kind of have to, you know.
Right. We also want to give... them some room to improvise too, right? So
Yeah.
if we write, and I like the idea, it makes sense to me, and as a veteran DM, I'm going with Tanner's idea of there's just the same amount of bells as there are players. What a coincidence. But then I imagine like that kid in high school who sits down with his friends to DM for the first time, and there's 8 of them. We didn't write 8 trials, and he's now got to be like, "Wow, there's a trial for this," So either we can offer more trials, sort of like random table kind of thing, which is we got away from that. We were there, we got away from it, and go back to that, or we just commit to kind of there's three trials, and if there are 8 of you, you're going to have to figure out a way to kind of divvy that up, which again is kind of part of life, right? Like we can't all be winners every single time. How do you support your friend? How do you help them out to get this thing? So
Yeah.
I think for the one shot,
I like that. I like that because it does tell me that I'm like, you know what? We can't make a trial per player, like just time wise, not for one shot, sadly, which kind of streamlines like what the purpose of the trial has to be, because in that way I'm like, okay, if the purpose of the trial isn't to choose a person for a specific bell, but rather to determine general worthiness to enter the inner sanctum and become a bell warden, then it's like, okay, then we can like keep our trials to like 2 or 3, which time wise, that's much more efficient. And then it's a matter of like, oh, whether it's like a key and you get keys for each trial, and there's like 3 total and it unlocks the door to inner sanctum, or the layout of the monastery is such that they almost act like gatekeeping trials. You get through the first one, then you gotta get through the second one, and then the third one finally lets you into the inner sanctum. Either way, I think that could be, fairly fun. And if we still wanted to play into the fact that each bell has its own ability, because we had a lot of really cool names for these bells, then that could play into the final combat where it's like, hey, these players, they hear the names of the bells, and the DM could even choose which bells like are there, because like just have the description of what kind of mechanical bonus the bell warden of that bell would get, so that the DM knows, and then the DM can just choose like, oh, I have 5 friends, I'll pick these 5 because I think it'd be fun for them, and then they start ringing the bells and getting those buffs as they're fighting monsters and stuff. That's a couple ways we could do it.
So, what if we want to do kind of the inner sanctum type idea, just because I know Rob's challenge and actually my trial, like the bells that they have to ring are away from the monastery. Maybe it's not so much that like you have to get a key, but like by ringing the bell, you are deemed worthy to enter in, like to progress into the monastery. And when the bell is rung, it's very loud and everyone in the city hears it. And so when you're doing the trial and you hear it, you're like, oh crap, someone else just advanced. Oh,
smart.
Yeah. Kind of piggyback off that. How does this feel? So instead of like I don't know so by inner sanctum, I'm picturing like in a monastery, like you have this kind of like sort of temple structure, maybe on top of a bluff. It's always usually at the top of some stairs, right? And the city of Chimefall is kind of around it. So like the devout and the pious, they kind of inhabit the monastery, and there's this kind of city, this kind of commerce that has sprouted up around the base of it because it's famous for, closing the portal and whatnot. And all the trials are happening down below around the city of Chimefall. And once you've successfully completed a trial, you now have the right to go up to the monastery, and you take your trial bell and you ring it at the base of your bell. Like I'm still thinking these bells are in these massive towers, and the door to your bell tower opens up. And it kind of creates for this kind of cool moment where your bell opens your door, and now you have to go up into this tower to kind of ring your bell. which in my mind's eye could make for a cool fight scene. Battling up the stairwell. And also like this kind of like Assassin's Creed moment where how do you get down if your whole stairwell is filled with monsters? Do you like swan dive into the haystack? I don't know how that sits on you, fellas.
I like that because I think up until this moment, I was still trying to be like, okay, how can we do the trials and the player numbers and make that work for the time? But I think while you were talking, I just kind of realized, I was like, you know what? Not every player has to be a Bell Warden.
Correct.
Frankly. We can have enough Bell Warden spots as the trials that we think that they have time for, right? Mm-hmm. And then the other player, and then that's good for the final encounter, because since the players are they have a little like bell on them, the ones that got chosen as a Bell Warden, they are essentially the target of all these monsters. Right? And so then the other players, they actually have a nicer time because they're not just getting beat the heck up. They're more defenders, but they're not going to be attacked as much. So it's kind of like a more fun role. So it's like, hey, we're sorry you didn't win the Bell Warden spot because the trial and the specific skill sets, didn't match yours or just some bad rolls. But regardless, you're going to have some fun at the end just beating people up, without them attacking you because they're attacking the people with the bells. And in terms of, I do think that the trial should be kind of like local, like you were saying, Rob, like kind of like around the town. That I think that could work fairly well, like that way you see the different locales of the town.
Nothing is beyond a day's ride. None of that. Maybe it might take 20 minutes to get from one end of the town to the other.
Yeah, and even like I was thinking about it, I was like, you know what, it would be sick because you were talking about like a Michigan lakes like size, the Great Lakes size lake there. And I was like, wouldn't it be cool if the town was like right on a huge lake, and if the monastery was on kind of like a bluff, yes, that like goes out into the lake essentially,
So I found this map generator real quick. I figured we could play around with it and see if we make something we like. This is the large city. Is that too big?
Yes and no. Like that's exactly what I was picturing the shape of this place to be. Maybe just with less like if we shorten that wall a little bit, right? So there was less.
What do you mean?
So like, so on the right side of the screen for the viewers, there's a place called Six Markets, and there's like a little gate entrance.
Yes.
If maybe that second turret there on the bottom cuts a more shallow half circle all the way to the west side of the map called Catfield Sunset Quarters. Right?
Oh, cattle yard. So basically, like right
just
here,
cutting out Westtown and Southgate, basically, like just a smaller version of that, and maybe a few less farms there. And I think that would be like in my mind's eye, that was like pretty close. And then all of the towers, would be where the castle is, in the inner gate.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not familiar with this tool, so.
Sorry, save this picture for us. I'm gonna. I want to see that. That's cool.
Let's see if we can. Does this do anything? Okay, well, that did something.
Oh wow, you changed the wall.
Look at you.
Oof,
for you listeners,
doing right now.
Justin has brought up a really cool map generator that we're gonna get sidetracked with.
Yes. Okay.
It's true.
I might just
for the listeners. This is a sick tool. What's it called?
It is called. Well, I don't know what it's called. It is on whataboo.itch.io/medieval-fantasy-city-generator. We can put this
in the
link.
show notes.
Yeah, definitely. But I think we're kind of wrapping up on time here. The last thing we need to do is create assignments. So just like last time, we're all busy. I think each of us need one assignment that we can work on. We wrote our trials, and we kind of changed. So actually,
the trials have kind of
yeah
been warped a little bit, but yeah, we'll have to see. Anyway,
so I think we settled on 4 trials is what we're supposed to have.
Yeah, I think I have. I've got like my main trial, and then I have like 2 very quick, like add-on trial, like bonus trials, which I think work very nicely. We were talking about them before we started filming. Actually, that I think I will probably add for the beginner DM who does get 5 or 6 players and wants to throw 2 more trials into the mix. So what I think the homework should be for each of us is to polish our respective trials, right, with this new understanding that and again, you can leave it as is. We've all wrote some pretty solid stuff, so I don't want to make anybody like rewrite, but you may want to add like a second set of rules for running it as a skill challenge. And the other homework assignment that I just want to throw in a bid for is the collection of artwork. So I'm just finishing up another supplement that I'm going to send you guys copies of. And the hardest part for me was layout and artwork, because that's not my forte. And citing all of where that artwork came from, the Shutterstock sources and all the royalty-free stuff. So if you come across any artwork, collect it and just record where it comes from, and we'll start like maybe putting it in a file for future use.
Okay. So just so I know, we've settled on this basic timeline. Adventurers come to city, learn about the ceremony, start doing trials, probably do 1 or 2, maybe in the middle of 2 or 3, like trial number 2 or 3, bad things start happening, so they have to finish 3 and 4 while monsters are assailing them, and then go ring the final chime. Is that kind of how we've decided on the timeline?
Yes, for me, the one exception would be I would think I would want the trials to be kind of done before the monsters assailing them, but I would want some kind of heralding of the harbinger of doom. Maybe it pulses after each trial, like letting them know like this is really about to happen, so you need to pick up the pace. Something that it emits maybe 1 or 2 creatures start to come out. Or the bad actors that are not the big bad, but like the mini boss is kind of like get a little bit more rambunctious in some way, shape, or form. There needs to be some impetus or some peril.
Yeah. In my mind, I think that for the second phase, that's where it should have the most like straightforward combat. Frankly, where we have like a mini boss who's like, no, you're gonna fight and you're gonna kill this guy. But so that we can make that final phase, that we were talking about, less about beating all the enemies and more about ringing the bells, right? But they still get that kind of triumph of having beaten someone, like in a straightforward kind of combat thing. But that was just during the middle when they're feeling less rushed.
So, in that case, I say we stick with just 3 trials because there's 3 of us. And I doubt they can get to more than that. They finish the 3 trials, and right when they finish, coincidentally, bad things happen. A mini boss shows up, because assuming that they go back to the square, like the central square, to like get the reward or whatever, or see what's happening next. Bad thing happens. Boss appears. They fight the boss, and then after the boss dies, the portal opens up and the real big boss comes out, and it's so huge that like obviously they can't fight it. The monks or something summon a giant avatar to fight it, or at least waylay it, and then they have to go ring the bell.
Yes, and I'm going to throw in another idea out there for us. This mid boss, right? Part of me wants to make another trial at least in name. It doesn't have to be one that they have to play, because while they're doing their trials, word reaches them that somebody has won or claimed a warden bell, and that turns out to be the big bad, and he has kind of, well, then why would the bell choose him? Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. But I was going to say, he refuses to cooperate. Like, he refuses to help. He wants the portal to be open. He's convinced that there's something on the other end that he needs to get to or whatever. And then, they either have to convince him, recruit him, or fight him for the bell that he's already won. And again, maybe there are 4 bells, but 3 trials. There's 3 missing, and he's the last bell warden standing. And it turned out that he was the big bad, the villain the whole time. He was the one who kind of offed the other bell wardens, and he's kind of behind this whole plot to begin with. And so this way, we don't have to worry about too much backstory. It's already kind of like there, but there's also this moment of, if we kill him, do we have to now find another owner for the bell? Like there's this, what do we do kind of moment for the players of like, we really need to convince him to come back to the good side, or, we risk having to find another bell warden, and there's no time left to do that.
See, I really think that idea is interesting, because by killing him, you do open up the portal, letting out the true big bad guy, which I think might make a lot of sense. We might have to brainstorm later on about like how to make him evil enough that they're like, okay, we need to get rid of this guy,
subdue him. Yeah, we can't. He should be aware that if he die, he's like like that movie Speed. He's got like the dead man's trigger. You kill me, ha ha ha. Right. So how do you beat him without killing him, and how do you keep him from like killing himself?
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful thing to talk about, and that sounds like a perfect mini boss, because it's like, hey, he's right in the middle after the trials are mostly done, and then that can also make him both like have like some evil intentions, or at least like have some intentions that he thinks are right, and then like after the fight is done, that's when all hell breaks loose, and then it's like, okay, final phase, rushing to those bells, doing whatever we're doing there.
Yeah. I think after the trials, there should be this kind of hooray moment where he takes you into the inner sanctum, and you think you're going to get rewarded, and the doors lock, and he's like, "You are now going to give me your bells."
That's smart.
I do like that.
Oh, that he was your guide the whole time, and he's explaining things, and you think he's cool, and you're pretty sure that the quiet ones, that other very sort of the other temple with the monks that's competing, you're pretty sure they're the villains, but they actually turn out to help you at the end, and it was this guy the whole time.
Cool. So homework: polish up the trial, and after we have the trials polished, I think phase 1 is done. Then we just need to do phase 2 and then phase 3. So homework is polish the trial, and then, I mean, each of us can probably brainstorm ideas about phase 2 and fighting the mini boss. So
yeah, okay. Polish the trial, and oh goodness, I don't know. Do we want to make stat blocks? I'm finding those tedious. I found an awesome generator, which maybe you also want to throw that in the show notes for the listeners.
Yeah,
some great tools that I came across for any of you folks who are interested in writing this sort of stuff. So I think that we're on finishing the trials and making some stat blocks for the necessary characters who need a stat block.
Yeah, I mean, and we can always, like, at least the way I do it, I always just do stat block at the end once I have like the story, but we can do stat blocks at any moment. But yeah,
we should make a map.
Yes.
And any layer actions for the final battle space would be kind of a cool idea. Give us some tools that we're working with that way.
I dig it.
Agreed.
Well, thank you guys for being here. Thank you for listening to us work through this. I think we're getting much closer. And one thing to note is that with working through this, you start with this vague idea, and then it becomes clearer and clearer and clearer and clearer. I don't know if it ever becomes perfectly clear, but we're getting there. And anything else you guys want to say before we close out today?
So long, and thanks for listening.
Yeah, honestly, like we really appreciate you guys watching us geek out about ideas that we're having for the campaign. And Rob, we always appreciate your feedback. You do so well on this. It's a real learning experience.
100%.
Appreciate that, guys. Appreciate that.
Yeah. So thank you, listener, for being here with us. We'll be back next time for another amazing episode of How to Be a Better DM. But until then, let's go ahead and roll initiative.